heiße ich euch.
And now I would like to wish you all welcome to our 144th edition of Europe Calling with Vice-Chancellor and Minister for Economy and Climate Protection, Robert Habeck. Thank you very much for having found the time today, 1 hour, to answer questions from our guests on climate policy. My name is Maximilian Fries. I'm Managing Director of Europe Calling and will moderate today's evening. Today we have over 9,000 people who follow us on Zoom and on YouTube, not only from Germany, but all over Europe. That's why we have interpretation. And I think you can say that this is the largest political seminar of which we know. If you know a larger one, tell us. In the last 24 hours, you answered 922 questions and gave up 34,000 votes to evaluate those questions. And those who received the most votes will be put to Robert Habeck. And in order to keep things manageable, we have already asked our funding members which questions they would like to ask Robert Habeck. The first issue is our road to 1.5 degrees. Then we speak about the dependence of European climate policy, and then about the climate policy and threats for democracies. That's all I want to say. We'll start right away. Thank you very much, Robert Habeck, to be with us. And the first question comes from Max Bürg-Gemasma. He asked, decarbonization in Germany is too slow. Germany cannot meet the 1.5 limit. And the risk is that we go over climate tipping points. What can the federal government do to reach this limit? When will the climate protection emergency program come? This program is ready, except the transport sector. This is a compendium in which all ministries, but first of all, good evening. I forgot it. I was already answering the first question, but good evening, everybody. So this emergency program, this is a compendium of all measures of all the ministries which have to contribute to climate protection, agriculture, industry, and so on. And we make an evaluation internally in the different ministries, also in mine. Expert panels help us here. And after the internal evaluations in the various sectors, we think this is enough to reach the 2030 targets, except in transport. That's why we haven't finished the package yet, which is not very nice. But on the other side, the measures which are stipulated in it will be done. The laws and the regulations which we will have to present will be presented in the course of the legislative period. And also in the transport sector, we are doing a lot, but it's not enough to close the gap. The energy efficiency law, the way I see it, is ready, at least as far as the works by my ministry are concerned. We're going to coordinate with other ministries. There is a first draft, which is already half a year old, but it's ready now for the decision in the cabinet, and then it will go into the Bundestag. Whether we will get the votes necessary in the cabinet where we need unanimity is not certain, but the federal chancellor, who has competence over all important political decisions, said when talking about atomic energy that he wanted a very ambitious energy efficiency law. So I think that we will get it through the cabinet. Can you also say which is the last sticking stone? Where are the frictions in the cabinet? Well, the energy efficiency law generalizes what we have in the different emergency regulations or decrees of this year for public administrations. For example, that the rooms are not heated up to a higher temperature than 19 degrees Celsius. And we also had reduction targets for industry. We also have a monitoring program. And for those sectors which after half of the period of amortization um, are done, that they have to be carried out. And so there is the obligation to feed this warmth in the grids. These are the large blocks. And well, there are improvement suggestions in all three areas. Okay, thank you. Next question is a question from Frolian Kopla and Claudia Thiele, received 32,000 votes. They say, from the view of many climate and transport transition activists, FDP and BMDV are actively against the necessary conversion of the mobility sector towards more cycling, public transport. What do you think the Traffic Light Coalition can do as to the traffic code and traffic law? As I said in the cabinet, decisions have to be taken unanimously. People have to agree. That is sometimes laborious and not very satisfactory if certain laws cannot be put through or slow down because certain coalition partners are not ready there yet. But this means that we have to talk with everybody, have to, if we raise our voice or if we resort to threats, this is not helpful. We have to convince people. And as to the transport sector, so far we have not been successful enough, but we will continue on this way. And the Green group in the Bundestag who can take decisions has also presented a new large package for climate protection measures in transport, and similar proposals come from my ministry, but we have to coordinate ourselves with the with the transport ministry. Otherwise, they are just green proposals and not of the government. But we keep talking. As to the process of the last generation, their main target are transport targets, speed limit, €9 ticket. Is there something that helps you, such a movement, if they really have a focus on transport? Yes, indeed. If the movement manages to mobilize majorities for climate protection. And looking back for 19, 20, 21 during Corona, and then the horrible aggression of Russia against Ukraine, I can say that the climate protection movement, Fridays for Future and others are those who brought about majorities for climate protection. And with these new majorities, politics had to change. I remember when on the street, there were the decisions of the Green-Red Coalition. Some people were disappointed, and now people are disappointed again that we cannot close the gap in transport. But once again, I have to say that the force of this movement is because they make possible majorities. Young people come together in Fridays for Future and others and have become real societal movements. And if this pressure from the street can be upheld, then the politics will have to follow these ideas. Thank you very much. Now we have another question. 10% of the people are not from Germany who follow us. So the European perspective is important. Andras Lukács from Clean Air Action Group in Hungary and Harald Eberhard asked the following. After the subsidies bid for the climate, 8.4 billion euros, kerosene exemptions for cross-border flights, 4 billion euros, VAT exception for cross-border flights, then company car privileges and so on. When is this done? Will this nonsense be stopped? What do you do? Well, there are different categories, as was mentioned. I mean, it's true. This was not a measure to which make fossil engines less attractive, that we lowered mineral oil taxes, but we wanted to have prices which are still okay for commuters. That's why we did it. It was a short one-off measure, which was really related to the situation at the moment. Then tax on kerosene when it comes to cross-border aviation. This is a topic which has to be solved in a cross-border dialogue. And so this is still more difficult than the problems we have to solve within the coalition. But you all can contribute to it, that the combustion of fossil energies does not become more attractive, but there are different root causes, and therefore we need different measures. But altogether, it is true that not a lot is happening at the moment. The lowering of the mineral oil tax is not in force any longer, but in the other areas, there is not a lot of movement towards ecological tax reform or the phasing out of tax exemptions which are bad for the climate. Yes, this is something we all witnessed. Thank you very much. Now, top one question by Ingeborg Naundorf. It's a question that mentions a company, but we don't want to make advertise. We don't want to make a commercial here for certain companies. Therefore, I generalize the question. There is a company in southern Germany which produces electric cars. And despite the fact that supporters donated 45 million euros, this company faces insolvency. What can be done in Germany to actively support such companies? First of all, the economic logic is that we cannot have programs for individual companies. We foster technological change. Climate neutral technologies in general. We go through companies who can apply for certain programs. They have to present their ideas, then they will get funding or no. We also look out for companies, startup companies, especially companies led by women, but we do not look at a certain company and say, this company we want to help or to save. Or this entrepreneur I find sympathetic. No, we wonder what we need in society, what technological steps can get us there. And for that, we then set up a program, and then the companies have to, well, adopt the program or use the program for themselves. The main funding is the environment premium in other areas than mobility, i.e. a premium subsidy for buying certain things. So we have not really subsidized the conversion of the industry, but the purchase of the products. This is also not geared towards certain companies, German companies, foreign companies. It depends on the product. And we have lowered this premium a little bit for the market because, well, this is something which has to be observed. I think many of you know that a large American producer has notably lowered prices, so there is some leeway. If there is less funding, this does not necessarily mean that it becomes more difficult to buy such cars, but because the net price might go down, and then such cars would still be possible.
Europa, von die Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika. Ja, Entschuldigung.
So the moderator just said the United States of Europe and then corrected himself. That would be funny. So the IRA law, the American IRA law, is really a targeted subsidy for American companies. So could you say something about this topic? What should the EU do in order to react to the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act? Maybe I could mention two things that should not be forgotten because they are essential for a future-proof, competitive industrial policy. So, Inflation Reduction Act means they're trying to reduce inflation, but what they're actually doing is investing money. They're investing money in new future-proof markets, not in older markets. So in times when the discussion is what to do in terms of macroeconomic policy for Europe, that could be a solution, but not by investing in overheated markets, but in new markets, massive investments in new markets in order to produce a new competitiveness. And the second thing I wanted to point out is that this is an American investment in clean technologies, green transformation. So it's batteries, solar panels, semiconductors. Those are all beneficiaries of this new law, not fossil energies. That is a clear decision by the American government, by the US government, to invest in the new phase in the future. And that should be a clear sign for us. If you're keeping to old energy, types of energy, fossil fuels, etc., you're not going to have an issue with the climate, but also with your industrial or economic policy. There's also China. If you're looking at e-mobility in China, we had 5% authorizations around 2000, and then 25% in 2022. Of course, we still have more than that, but their increase is much sharper, and they're going to invest more. And these cars that have been authorized, mainly and not European, there's just one, very few of them, just one German car maker among those e-vehicles, and that's our main export market. So this is one other area where we're trying to really merge economic and climate policy. But now I'm getting to your question, that those were all just asides. So these are good developments, but there's one issue with the IRA, because there's one clause in it, one provision, that specific products have to be made in America. For instance, the e-mobiles. So that is really, will really affect the global market, also the European market. And after we pointed out that that is not okay, they changed it a little bit, and they said, for instance, it does not affect rental cars. Rental cars are a large part of the market in the States. So that's a little bit of an opening, but it's maybe not enough. What we're doing now is continue our negotiations with the Americans so they don't infringe against WTO law, and that in Europe we can also make quicker decisions. Support procedures can remain strict, but should have to be fast decisions so that we can have competitiveness in Europe. Thank you. So fast speed of action is the main topic of our next question, because we're looking at the energy turnaround. That's our top two question. Jürgen Schwarz is asking why projects for regenerative energies are not prioritized in the same way as LNGs, even though possible loss of coastal towns is a lot, possible damage to coastal towns is a lot larger. And Hannes Jörg is also asking about wind power plant authorizations. Why is it taking so long? Yeah, we have introduced a number of procedures in order to speed up these processes. And we've also talked to the federal states, the German Länder, because even though we adopt the general federal laws, it's still up to the lender level in order to, it's still up to them to authorize this. It's their competence. But a lot has happened there. And then there's one major measure for speeding to speed things up that came in December, where we've been conducting the so-called strategic environmental compatibility assessment. So in areas for wind power plant, there's no environmental impact assessment anymore. There shouldn't be any material damage to species protection, but just a speeding up of the authorization so that things can go faster. And that means that in all of these preferential areas for wind power plants, in these 1.5 years that this particular law will be valid, things can move fast. And we're just implementing this next week or the week after. It will go through the cabinet and then be adopted by the German Bundestag, by the parliament. So that will speed things up even more. And similarly to FSIU and other infrastructure projects, there's going to be some conflict about this. I think many of our listeners will know that such projects will make a major contribution to energy safety in Europe, but they're contentious. And the same will go for renewables. We need these projects. They are necessary. We've done a lot the past years in order to expand renewables faster, and we will reap the fruit of that this year. But of course, there are conflicts around this too. We all know this, especially around wind power plants. There's always a bit of resistance and questions. But if we want to survive the climate crisis as an industrial economy, then we have to expand our share of renewables. We've started this, but this year we will take up speed, a lot of speed. Well, lots of people, you talk about this, what I can hear in canteens, etc., is that many people have selected organic electricity, say the past few years, but the price increase is just the same as for fossil fuels. So Jochen Klöner has the following question: are things going to continue this way? Or why is your ministry working on reform for generating advantages? Is there law in the making in order to give renewables an advantage over other forms of energies? Of course, we always continue to work on things, but one of the main things has been started now, because we now have adopted the law for a restart of the digital energy turnaround. Basically, it's about smart meters. And so the cheaper prices for generating renewables should somehow end up with the consumers. Before the energy crisis, we had 30 cents. Now it's the upper limit is 40 cents, and it doesn't matter if electricity is traded at the Leipzig exchange for 0 cents, or if the electricity prices change, we always have the same price signal. So in economic terms, there is no reason to adjust to this cheaper form of energy, because there is no price reduction that ends up with the consumers. So we would need smart meters, not the old meters that go around in circles in our basements, but digital meters, in order to give households a price signal. Electricity providers can do this now, even now, but starting 2025, they have to. All electricity providers have to offer variable tariffs from 2025. And if you do have a digital, a smart meter, and you have this option of variable tariffs by your provider, then you can probably just program your meter so that you don't want a specific type of consumption above a certain price, for instance. And for instance, charging of vehicles, electric vehicles, you can make your own choices then. Of course, this will come 10 years too late, but I'm not going to talk about the reasons why now, but this is coming now. This is a law that is supposed to be adopted this year with such obligations for electricity providers, as I said, and that will also solve another climate political problem, because when we have this price-sensitive development, consumption and production will also adjust. Not 100%, but there will be an adjustment. So we will save money, households will have a lighter burden, and less energy will have to be produced because the prices will also be forwarded to the consumers. Thank you. Especially for the energy turnaround and energy in general, has been Lützerath last week. A lot has happened, and we have seen some violence and injuries, which is horrible, of course. But just irrespective of who is to blame for what there, the question is, for instance, Annika has asked it, and a lot of people have supported that question, why the DIW expert opinion by Claudia Kempfert, etc., have not been taken into account when with the decision to excavate this coal. So why not just have a moratorium for Lützerath in order to really look at the facts first? Well, the expert opinions that I have seen that said that we don't need the coal from Lützerath did not take into account two factors in sufficient degree. The first, lignite blocks have been prolonged. That was supposed to be phased out. I'm not proud of it, but it's the current situation. So we're using more coal in order to save natural gas. So that will have to be excavated, those volumes. And the second point, these pits have to be safeguarded so that there are no landslides, etc. And that is something that's very difficult to calculate. There are very few experts who can do that. That's irrespective of theoretical energy amounts. But of course, you have to actually excavate a certain amount to make sure that this is worth it. So the coal that we have, the amount of coal that we have below Lützerath is exactly the right amount. In the media, there has been a lot of criticism against the Green Party and Minister Neubauer in Northern Westphalia. And there was a lot of focus on the Green Party as opposed to other parties. So you personally, what's your conclusion? Did you take did you draw any conclusions from how to communicate things over the past few weeks? Well, it was a demand of the climate movement and my party to have fixed end date, and not just to say emissions trading will take care of it. And I was a little bit surprised over this argument in the debate that it is not necessary to have a fixed end date because higher CO2 prices would have made sure of the end of lignite anyway by around about 2030. That may be the case, but it's not necessarily the case. I would say that the climate movement has achieved this, the fixed end date. That was what achievement of theirs. And we had a similar campaign for the injection engine. I mean, I did hear these arguments, but not usually from the climate movement. That's new.
Diese Enddaten braucht, ist Planungssicherheit. Planungssicherheit für die Alternativen. Ich habe am Anfang auf Ihre Frage geantwortet, eine Klimaschutzbewegung hat da ihren besonderen Wert, wo sie eine
At the beginning, I said that climate protection has a special value where a societal majority can be found. You have to imagine we rely on phasing out of coal in 2030, then we have the winter of 2029 and say, well, 1 year has gone by, but we haven't created, 9 years have gone by, but we still haven't created any alternatives. And people cannot say, well, we'll just live without electricity with only a minimum amount of electricity. This means that even those who are really in favor of climate protection would not be in favor of such a solution. So what is the alternative? How can we assure such majorities and supply security in Germany? For this, we need to take investment decisions. Somebody has to take a lot of private money and say, well, this is the energy system of the future. We replace coal plants with renewables, but for the gaps we have when the sun is not shining and when there is no wind, we need other plants which burn molecules, gas, or if possible, hydrogen plants, but hydrogen plants are not ready yet. We don't have the quantities necessary. We want to have it in 7 years in energy policies. This is tomorrow. So we have to find investors fast. And that's why such end dates are so necessary. I think what we agreed upon is good, necessary, and was correct. Well, you never stop learning, so the question is justified. And what I learned is that the roles which everybody plays out there have to be clarified. A climate movement is a movement for more climate protection, and these people understand themselves also as a protest movement. They have to be unsatisfied with the federal government because if not, they would be superfluous. And they have to think about all the complex systems, but they do not necessarily have to present a solution for the combination of all the systems at work. But a government has to do that. We cannot be just against something. We also have to be in favor of something. And what we're in favor of, we have to put into practice. And in the heat of the debate, maybe people have sometimes overlooked that we are in different roles. Find sometimes different answers, different opinions, but this can be accepted if you understand which internal logics are at play for the movements
zu unterwerfen haben.
And for us. Yes, and I think this is also a little bit what we attempt here. And therefore, thank you very, very much for being here. We try to ask these questions and to understand the internal logics of government action as far as it is possible to talk about them publicly. I think this is something very, very important because many people wonder what you do in this respect would like more transparency also in your negotiations with RWE. In many questions, people say, yes, you describe internal logics here, but I don't still see them and I'd like to find out more about them. Well, internal logic, just to say what is obvious anyway, it means that the first task in the last year was to keep the climate crisis, but also energy supply under control. Gas, fossil energy was a very, very difficult question in this respect, a question of conscience. But as I said a while ago, it was my conclusion, and you can be of a different opinion, but my opinion was that if in Germany there had been one blackout after the other, then climate protection would not have found majorities in society anymore. And that's what is decisive in democracies. You have to mobilize majorities. There are votes on the street in a way, and they always have to bring a majority for climate protection. That's our political task, but we can reach this only if we guarantee the security of energy supply. If we guarantee this, well, this is a different task which we have as a government. Fridays for Future don't have this task. They're not in that responsibility, but they have to have an influence on the public opinion, create narratives, images, places. It is well known that I was against making Lützerath to that place, but the images were very powerful, very forceful. And insofar I can accept that a climate movement who has to keep the attention high for their topic has also to publish such images. That's what I meant when I was talking about the different roles we have. And on this basis, we can continue. When we talk about movements, I'm now talking about the dependencies. On the climate conference, we had somebody speaking live from Senegal on the new gas field in Senegal, which is planned. And there was also talk in the movement, or the movement said that they want basically the investment that is good, that's also good for the fishermen locally. But why do you first invest here in this type of energy and not right from the start into renewables? Yes, I think you're right. If you look at the level of renewables for Africa, I've just been to Namibia, and South Africa. Then in Africa, you have around 1% renewables, about 50 in Europe. I'm from Schleswig-Holstein. The sun is not always shining, but nevertheless, we have lots of solar parks. So Africa has a huge potential, which is not utilized yet. And if you look at the second aspect, at the existing and possible amount of natural gas on the world market, i.e. the increases compared to the consumptions as they can be forecast, then you can say that the gas market is already very, very large, and we don't need additional projects in Senegal. Now a question from NGOs. Michael Reckwart from PowerShift asks as to the dependence of raw materials. Germany is nearly to 100% dependent on metallic raw material imports. So there is a huge dependence, and I would say 80% of PV modules come from China. More trade partnerships and trade agreements. Raw material partnerships are planned by the federal government, but this will not reduce the dependence, I suppose. Or how would you reduce these dependencies, or can they be reduced? Well, I have to say that these are not the same instruments as with a grand coalition in the past, but I don't want to talk about the past. This dependencies from China, also from Russia, it didn't seem to be a problem in the past for the government. But I want to point out that this government has just discontinued the energy charter, and when you renounce it, only 20 years later, it is stopped, which is really a strange thing. I really wonder what the people thought when they agreed on this. But we leave it together with many other European countries, i.e. we stop the bad things and we try to set up good things. We have a new focus for our trade agenda. And in the past, things that impacted me a lot were that on the one hand, you had those who said free market, open markets, free economy, as many free trade agreements as possible. And if you're against it, you don't understand how the economy functions. And on the other side, there were those to whom I belonged who said, well, wait, free trade, where are the protection safeguards, where are our deals? Because it's not only non-tariff trade barriers. We're talking about people who went to the streets, were apprehended sometimes by the police, but have nevertheless created majority in the society for a new approach. And we're now in favor of a new approach. Some were for it, some were against it. But in the past, Germany has made no move. But we have now also ecological criteria in these trade agreements. And free trade agreements, well, this neoliberal thinking is defined afresh by us, because we want to have just a good added value for society with these from these agreements. And Europe has a large economic cloud, and we have found sustainable ways now for various countries to come together and to change the trade agreements, CETA also. And if they are changed, if they're amended, then we can agree on them. One example, a South American country which has large lithium reserves, which according to the old free trade regime should be exploited by foreign companies. And they said, well, this is already negotiated and we're not, but it would be a good idea to, first of all, exploit these reserves ourselves, use it for our country, create work for our people, because there is unequal treatment between domestic investors and foreign investors. And I said there are new ways to do this. We can do it in a different way because we do not want to exploit your country. We just want access to the lithium, but under conditions you can define yourselves. And it sounds like this is less neoliberal, but for these countries and also for African countries, such a focus should be very interesting, very attractive in the future because they can use their own riches much better. And ecological and economic policies leads us to an added value through such free trade agreements, also for the countries, for the partner countries. We don't just reap in the benefits, and this means that in comparison to the Great Coalition, a lot has changed. I think in this area there are many, many questions left open. Could you say something on the issue of qualified workers? Because many people fear that we have these gorgeous goals, 2038 and whatever in the Heute show. The question was put whether we have enough qualified workers for this. No, we don't. We have already more than 100,000 unfilled jobs with technical workers, engineers, and statistically, you can also say that these numbers will increase because many of the populous birth years will go in retirement. So it is very, very likely that I, as an economy minister, have to say that it is clear. We had all those debates on the right form of family support. As a minister of the economy, I have to say, if a part of the family wants to work, even though there are children, it can be the man or the woman, and the family ministers don't want this, they are not right. We had ideological debates on the education system, but we realized that there is a high percentage of people leaving schools without having a qualification, and this is not acceptable. We had ideological debates on whether the refugees from 2015 who came here seeking asylum, whether they can work on our market. Well, I have to say everybody who is here and who has a degree is needed here. We need to have more potential. That is very clear here in this country, and we need more migration. We have already the basis for a point system. People need to have certain abilities. They don't necessarily need the degrees or the diplomas. This is something we are going to extend much more because we want to create the most modern immigration law in Europe.
Gewotete Frage von Stefan Schriever, nochmal zum Thema LNG-Terminals.
There is another question on LNG terminals that lots of people supported. And it's with regard to the capacity of LNG terminals, which is a lot more than the gas that we use to import from Russia. So isn't that just focusing more on fossil infrastructure rather than getting rid of it? So how many LNG terminals do you think you're going to open? 2 to 3, depends on how you count it. But I'm going to come back to those numbers. But just on the question, what are you going to do with all these LNG terminals? We've got enough gas and storage. I have 3 points to make on that. We've got the gas in storage because we bought it last year with subsidy by the state for prices that were not sustainable. Sometimes I feel like people are forgetting this. We cannot repeat this because it costs a lot of taxpayers' money, and many people have been driven into insolvency. Some of them have become insolvent, and consumers weren't able to sleep anymore because they weren't able to pay their gas bills. So when you're saying that the storage is full now, what are you talking about, Minister Habeck? I'd like to remind you what the price was. And then lignite. In order to get rid of lignite from the electricity production, we will need other power sources whenever wind power and solar power isn't enough. And at the moment, unfortunately, that's natural gas as fast as possible. We would like to replace that by a CO2-free hydrogen, but at the moment that's not possible yet. So if you want to get rid of other types of coal, charcoal, you have to get rid of, you have to use natural gas. And the worst case scenario, I have to say that very clearly, would be not to install the capacities now, and then after the winter, we'd still not be in a position to say, okay, we can continue our coal phase out. That would be a complete loss of that game. So we have to make sure that we have enough capacity and storage in order to continue the coal power phase out as planned. And we need access to the world market. I've already talked about access, but the gas did not really arrive in Germany in the right way because we did not have the right infrastructure after losing access from Russia. And with the LNG terminals, we're getting that capacity as 55 billion cubic meter gas. And at the moment, we're getting the 14 billion cubic meters. That's 3 vessels, and that's going to be increased to 30 next year. And of course, in other European countries, we also have an increased capacity, but I still don't think it's going to be too much, because you have to learn the lessons from history that we learned during the COVID crisis and also during the energy crisis, to have a little bit of a buffer, not just enough. Because there's always something that could happen, and we really don't want the next energy crisis and then be forced to switch on our coal-fired power plants again. And then my last point, let's not just focus on Germany. At the moment, we're just surviving because we're receiving gas from Norway and the Benelux countries. And via Germany, Central Europe and Southeastern Europe are being supplied with gas, even Hungary, Western Ukraine, Switzerland, etc. So they're using our infrastructure. They can use our infrastructure. So it's going to be a likely scenario that we will have to also provide gas, supply gas to these countries. So it's important when you think infrastructure to also keep your neighbors in mind, and just having it doesn't mean that we're going to need it. It's like with the fire brigade. We have a fire brigade, but of course that's not because we're planning to have any fires. But any mayor could say it's a little bit too expensive. I don't want to keep having the fire brigade and having to pay for them, but that's not a solid argument. The only argument here would be it could be too expensive. But I don't agree with this, because with this infrastructure, we can achieve our climate goals. We need it. And the cost argument cannot beat the security argument of safety of supply. So we have 8 minutes and 2 more questions. I think we can do it. So social justice, Bärbel, Winkler, and Eckhard Jung have a very similar question. They're saying that Switzerland levies a CO2 tax and then divides the revenue by the number of citizens, and then everyone receives this amount. So why not do the same in Germany? And I would like to add to that, the EU has just decided to exclude super yachts from the CO2 tax. But yeah. What about the coalition agreement in this? In Germany, the federal government does not have a central or direct link to all citizens. There are some interfaces with the citizens. We have taxes, but not everyone pays taxes. There's a child benefit, but not everyone has children. There are pensions, but not everyone receives them. There's student support, but not even all young people receive that. So there are different groups, and we don't have one system, and that would be a precondition in order to pay out such tax revenues. The finance Ministry of Finance is thinking about it now, but of course, as everything in Germany is complicated, it will take a while, and there's an issue with data protection, of course. It's a challenging point, because it would mean that the federal government would be able to pool this type of information, how many children you have, your income, whether you're a student, etc. So I can see in neighboring countries it works well if you're just selecting whether you want it or not, so you can opt out. You can decide yourself. But that would be a solution to the data protection issue, but you still need the IT software. So we have tried to select a different path in Germany, because we abolished another type of levy or tax. So energy and electricity consumption is also income related. So richer households usually use more energy, so produce more CO2 than poorer households. So the climate support would have a degressive effect. So those who emit more CO2 have to pay more, you can then divide that, and there's a little bit of an element of redistribution. But when we look at the levy under the Renewable Energies Law, the EEG, it's a little bit different, but it also has some sort of a similar effect. So even though it's not exactly the same in economic terms, it still means that we're using revenue under the Renewable Energies Law in order to lower the burden on those who produce less CO2. And I think it's important. We do want to support heat pumps, e-mobility, etc. So getting rid of the EEG levy is something that I can support. The redistributive effect isn't really as satisfactory, though. Well, crystal ball, will we receive some money from the federal government before the next federal elections? No, but maybe after. Last question. What about a major campaign by the Green Party for putting absolute priority of climate protection into law above all other interests, for instance, profit, etc.? And that would also affect this old agreement with RWE. But we have that. We have a very high priority of climate protection, and that has led to a situation where all the old laws that we've talked about, or newer laws that we've talked about tonight, really focus on decarbonization. And I know that with this audience, it's not a popular thing to say, but I would like to repeat it. In the Rhine area, stopping the coal exit, stopping coal-fired power plants 8 years earlier, that's a success in terms of climate protection. So we've talked a lot about energy and transport, but the next topics will be a lot more difficult. Food, construction, heating, even the climate NGOs have problems to mobilize people for that. So do you think that's going to be the real battle for climate protection? I have a little bit of a different view on this, also in terms of experience. I was energy and climate minister for 6 years in Schleswig-Holstein, and expanding renewables and electricity grids, as soon as you touch the personal household network that passes your own town or your house, that's when it gets difficult. So whenever you're getting close to people, so it's not that this was easy. And it's about infrastructure and the question, what are you contributing yourself? So that's a very personal question. And I think that the state should leave those private issues and decisions to people and shouldn't overregulate the way of life of people. That's something where I am more of a liberal. I don't think that the most private habits of people are something that the state should know about. So the solution for these topics is also in politics. You can't just put it all off and leave it to citizens. So for food, a lot has been done, similarly to energy supply, etc. I think that like 20 years ago, vegetarians were almost considered weirdos, and vegan people who ate vegan were really the exception. But now we have it everywhere. We have vegan restaurants everywhere, and it's nothing special anymore. And most people know it tastes really well. So it tastes really good. So a lot has happened in attitudes, but also in terms of politics, animal husbandry, etc. So there has been a little bit of a turnaround. And then for construction and heating, buildings, I mean, 2022 was a horrible year for many people. I don't want to be cynical. And then, of course, we have the horror of the development in Ukraine. So please don't misunderstand me. But for energy efficiency in terms of construction and building, that has now become top of the agenda for so many people. And we can see that in the demand for renovation of buildings and for heat pumps, etc. So maybe that inertia in the construction sector and energy efficiency for old houses can be overcome, because we've learned now that this has an effect, not just for climate protection, but also for saving costs. And we will continue to adopt buildings energy law, and so that you have to use renewable energies rather than continue with natural gas heating, etc. Okay, thank you very much. That was a very intense hour. Thank you for taking the time. And we've seen so many questions. And I would also like to give one of our audience the last word. Maybe somebody should tell Mr. Habeck that he's doing a great job and we shouldn't just complain about him all the time, John Solar says. Well, thank you very much. We had about 3,000 members of the audience. So wish you the best of luck for your work. We all need it and you need it. And I know also, because of my connection with Sven Giegold, how hard you're working for all of this, and you have been working, how many days and nights you're working. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Thank you. All the best, and see you soon.